Hi, today we're going to talk about evolution. And you probably have heard of the word evolve before. And essentially, it means to change. Conceptually, when we talk about evolution in biology, we're talking about how the all the species on this earth change and have changed over time. And this wasn't like a little bit of time. Most evolution takes very, very long. There are examples of microevolution, but in terms of what we're studying in biology class, it takes a long time. So, why does evolution occur? Well, because there is a struggle for existence. There's competition for resources like food, space, water, and competition is good, but it does lead to a struggle, and because some individuals are better fit for the circumstances, they have a natural advantage, and this is due to variation. Now, this lovely picture here is of two kittens. One is a little larger, one's a little smaller. This is really common in litters, and in many examples in nature. The smaller kitten may have a little bit of a tougher time getting nutrients from the mother cat, whereas the bigger kitten might push the little kitten out of the way and give it a little bit more of an advantage. This is just an example of some beetles that are engaging in some sort of conflict. This conflict could be driven by food, shelter, mates, etc. And then this I just thought was kind of a cute little picture here of these two little pigs that are eating some food. But yeah, there's one bowl and two of them. So just a couple examples. And before we move forward and talk about evolution and what drives evolution, I want to just set aside this idea that humans do artificially select. So, a really common example of that is with cows. And this is, just an example. Some cows produce more milk than other cows. Those cows are going to be selected for because they are useful to farmers. Farmers want a cow that's going to produce the most milk. Another example that's common is in dog breeds. In terms of our purposes as humans, we like cute little doggies, but in terms of ability to survive and reproduce in the wild, a little doggie might have a tough time. But because humans think they're cute, we breed those characteristics and traits, and that process is artificial selection. So, this guy, Charles Darwin, he was as the father of evolution because was the first person to kind of study living things and notice some of these trends. And he did that by sailing around the world on a ship in the 1800s, which is kind of wild. But he was a naturalist. He was from England, and he really focused his studies on the Galapagos Islands. And you can see the Galapagos Islands here in this slideshow. This is where he began his voyage, went around South America, around through the Pacific Ocean, Australia, the Indian Ocean, and then back up to England. And this is just an example of his boat that he took. And what did he do? Well, he looked at animals. And this is often kind of difficult for kids to listen to. But back in the day, naturalists would actually take the animals with them. So they would kill the animals and then study them, later on. They would also study them in the environments, but he did have quite a collection of animals that he took with him. So what did he do with his observations and trends that he noticed? Well, he noticed that there was a connectedness between living things, and he wrote a book. He called it On the Origin of Species. And in this book, he presents all his ideas, and he substantiates them. He backs them with information, and he was influenced by other folks. These other folks you can read about. They had some ideas like a giraffe that wants a longer neck can kind of will itself to have a longer neck. We know as a society now that that doesn't make sense. But again, this is the 1800s. And in addition, a lot of what Darwin was presenting, the information he was presenting, was very controversial because at the time, society was very religious, and the idea that God just didn't make all the animals as they are and that things changed over time really went against a lot of people's religious ideas. So, at any rate, Darwin was the first person to kind of put all these ideas about evolution and connectedness of living things and how species change over time. He was the first one to do this, and he did it in a book. And one of the big ideas is this idea of survival of the fittest. And I bet most of you have heard of that phrase. But I want to focus on this idea of fitness. The idea of fitness is how good is an organism for where it lives? Is it well suited for its environment? And organisms that have a high level of fitness are more likely to survive and reproduce. Now, we know within a population, there are genetic variations, and some of those variations may be good, some of those variations may be bad. If the variation is good, that individual most likely makes babies. Those babies have some of the same genes, some of the same traits, and that is how those traits and characteristics get passed on. Whereas other characteristics that may be less advantageous that result don't get selected for. And again, like I said, these adaptations may be behavioral or physical. So here are some what are called Galapagos finches. And these are some of the finches that Darwin noticed in the Galapagos Islands. And we can see that these finches have vastly different beaks. Okay. And even though they kind of have some characteristics that look alike, these beaks are adapted for the different food sources that the birds had in their surroundings. So this, you can kind of think, all right, well, what bird number one, what kind of food might this bird eat? Well, it's got kind of a big beak, so it probably eats like things that might be harder, that might need cracking open, like nuts. Whereas this number four finch has kind of a pointy, sharp beak, and that finch might eat food that is kind of smaller, maybe in smaller places like insects. This is an example of the Galapagos tortoises. These are actual tortoises that live in the Galapagos Islands that Charles Darwin observed. And he noticed that they clearly have some commonality between them, and they live in such close proximity. But one of the glaring differences is neck length and shell shape. And that's based on the food that is available in that particular area. So the tortoises that survive are well adapted or fit for their environment. So just a little flow chart here. If we have a group of organisms, we know that there's going to be variation within the population. And at times there is overproduction in terms of too many individuals in an area, which creates competition, and that is the struggle for existence. Both of those things, variation and overproduction resulting in a struggle for existence, result in some organisms living, some organisms not living. And those organisms that are living, that do live and reproduce, drive evolution in terms of adaptations that are advantageous for a given environment. So, and that's kind of what I just summarized there. Feel free to stop the video at any time if you want to just look over the presentation. I'll also put the presentation out there as well. So another one of Darwin's ideas that goes with survival of the fittest is this idea of natural selection. So this is based on how well suited, again, an organism is for its environment. So we can't see this happening in an instant, but we see natural selection occurring um, over time. Okay. So characteristics, traits, and those individuals that have those characteristics or traits that are good for a particular environment, those individuals have a tendency in nature to survive and reproduce and pass on those traits. So the last idea that I'm going to talk about with regards to Darwin at this time is this idea of descent with modification, and that is over very large periods of time, changes occurred within organisms, and these little changes accumulate and kind of lead to the species that we see in present time. So, again, main things I want you to take away: Charles Darwin, father of evolution. This idea of evolution is that living things have changed over time. That idea is driven by the concept of survival of the fittest and natural selection.